The miracle of the rain lasted a few hours. The argument about Marcus Aurelius, Christian soldiers, and one storm on the Danubian frontier became one of the strangest debates in early church history. During the Marcomannic Wars, a Roman army in the Quadi conflict zone is dying of thirst beyond the Danube. The sun has been pressing down for hours. Their water is gone, or close to it. The enemy's too near for retreat, and standing still is just a slower death. Then, in the memory of the ancient sources, the sky changes. Clouds gather. Rain falls. Roman soldiers drink from anything that'll hold water: shields, helmets, their own cupped hands. At the same moment, storm and lightning throw the enemy line into chaos. The army survives. The argument is just beginning. Because almost from the moment the rain stopped, different traditions started fighting over who got credit for the storm. Roman accounts, preserved most substantially through Cassius Dio, place the rescue inside Rome's own religious world. Christian writers like Tertullian claim that believers in the army prayed and that God answered with rain. Later storytellers went further still, tying the episode to the Thundering Legion and to imperial recognition the evidence cannot secure. One battlefield, one storm, several rival histories. So the question isn't only, did something happen? The better question is, who got to say what it meant? The setting is Marcus Aurelius's Northern War. Not the calm Marcus of marble busts and philosophy quotes, the emperor on campaign. Facing the brutal pressure of the Danubian frontier in a long, dangerous run of conflicts called the Marcomannic Wars. The exact year of the storm is debated. You'll see it dated to 172 or to 174. The exact battlefield has to be held just as carefully. The safest frame is broad, during Marcus's Danubian campaigns, in the Quadi conflict zone. That caution matters, because this event has attracted certainty for a very long time. Roman certainty, Christian certainty, later legendary certainty. But the sources don't give us one clean, neutral report with every detail locked in place. What they give us is a crisis. A Roman force cut off and suffering from thirst. Enemy pressure on every side. A moment where the weather could decide whether a campaign story ended in survival or disaster. In ordinary military history, that might be enough. An army gets trapped, a storm breaks, the weather changes the battle. But this story survived because ancient people didn't treat weather as empty background. A sudden storm in the middle of a battle wasn't just meteorology, it was a sign to be read. If rain came at the exact moment an army was near collapse, someone would ask why. Rome had an answer. Christians had another. And those answers tell us as much about the second-century world as the storm itself. Our earliest substantial non-Christian witness says the Romans were in desperate trouble. Cassius Dio, writing in the Roman historical tradition, preserves the core of the crisis. The army was trapped by heat and thirst. The men couldn't fight effectively. They couldn't easily retreat. Then clouds gathered and heavy rain came down. The scene is almost physical. Soldiers so desperate for water that the rain itself becomes part of the battle. They drink while still under threat. They try to recover their strength while the storm changes the field around them. Ancient sources converge on that much: crisis, sudden storm, Roman relief. But the agreement starts to break apart the moment the sources try to explain why. In the Roman explanation stream preserved with Dio, the answer isn't Christian prayer. It points to Hanuphis, an Egyptian ritual specialist tied to Marcus's entourage. The detail matters, but it shouldn't be inflated. Harnufis isn't a character we can turn into a full biography. The evidence won't carry that. What we have is a Roman explanatory tradition in which an Egyptian ritual expert invokes divine aid, especially connected with Hermes or Mercury of the air, and the rain follows. In other words, Rome could tell this story without Christians at the center. The army was saved. But in this telling, the deliverance fits the emperor's religious world: ritual, divine favor, the gods of Rome answering Rome in war. That can surprise modern Christian listeners, because the episode is remembered in church history as the miracle of the rain. But the first substantial non-Christian stream doesn't hand the story to the church. It hands us a rival claim, and that rivalry is the story. Christian writers soon told the same event a different way. Tertullian, writing near the end of the 2nd century, uses the storm in an apologetic argument. He claims that Christian soldiers in Marcus's army prayed during the crisis and that the rain came in answer. For Tertullian, this isn't just a battlefield memory. It's a public defense of the church. Christians were treated as suspicious people. They refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods. They were accused of disloyalty, secrecy, of being a danger to public order. So Tertullian turns the storm into an argument. Christians aren't the empire's enemies. Their prayers helped save an emperor's army. That doesn't make Tertullian a neutral reporter. He's making a case. But it does show something powerful. By the late 2nd century, Christian writers were already claiming the event as answered prayer. Eusebius later preserves another strand of that memory through Apollinaris of Hierapolis. In that telling, soldiers connected with the Melitene legion kneel in prayer. Rain refreshes the Romans, lightning strikes or scatters the enemy. The image is unforgettable. Roman soldiers on campaign, Christians in the ranks, knees bent, not to the emperor's gods, but to the god they worship. Rain falling on the army. It's also exactly the kind of image that needs careful narration. Christian writers claim this. The tradition is early, and it matters. But the historian can't say that Christian prayer is historically proven as the cause of the storm. The sources don't let us stand there with that kind of certainty. Faith can receive the story with reverence. History has to say what the witnesses say and where they disagree. Then comes the name that made the story even more memorable: the Thundering Legion. Later Christian tradition ties the miracle to Legio 12 fulminata, often associated with Melitene. The fit is obvious. A legion with a thunder name, a storm in battle, Christians praying, an emperor's army saved. It's the kind of connection that almost writes itself, but that's also the problem. The legion's thunder name appears to be older than the miracle itself. So the safest wording isn't Marcus renamed the legion because Christian prayer brought the storm. That would say more than the evidence supports. The safer, truer line is this: Christian tradition eventually tied the story to Legio 12 fulminata. But the unit identification is debated, and the thunder name likely predates the event. That can feel less dramatic at first. It actually makes the story more interesting, because now we can watch memory at work. An event happens on the frontier, a storm saves an army. Roman tradition reads it through Roman ritual and divine favor. Christian tradition reads it through prayer. Then, later memory gathers the most powerful pieces together: thunder, legion, emperor, miracle, protection. The story grows because it's useful. Not useful in the cheap sense, useful because it answered a question Christians urgently needed to answer. Can a people who refuse Rome's gods still be loyal to Rome's good? Tertullian's answer was yes, not because Christians worshipped the empire, because they prayed for it. The story grows even further with the alleged letter of Marcus Aurelius. Some Christian sources say, or imply, that Marcus himself acknowledged the miracle and wrote favorably about Christians afterward. In later forms, the letter can sound like exactly the evidence an apologist would want. The emperor sees what Christian prayer has done. He praises the believers. He threatens those who accuse them. If that letter were secure, it would change the whole episode. It would turn a contested battlefield memory into official imperial recognition. But this is where the strongest sounding proof becomes the weakest support. The surviving pro-Christian letter tradition is broadly treated as forged, interpolated, or textually unreliable. It doesn't fit as authentic imperial policy from Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus's wider reign can't be flattened into a story of sudden Christian favor. So we shouldn't say Marcus officially changed Roman policy because of the storm. We shouldn't present the letter as authentic state documentation. We should say something more careful. Christian authors claimed Marcus wrote favorably about the event. The surviving letter tradition isn't reliable enough to carry that claim as history. That caution doesn't destroy the episode, it clarifies it. Because the forged letter problem shows how badly later Christians wanted the story to prove more than the earliest evidence could prove. They wanted not only answered prayer, they wanted imperial acknowledgement. They wanted Rome itself to admit that the Christians it feared had helped preserve it. That desire is understandable. It's also exactly why the historian has to slow down. There's another witness, carved not on parchment, but in stone. The Column of Marcus Aurelius in Rome includes a famous rain and storm relief from the Northern Wars. It's powerful material evidence that Rome publicly commemorated a deliverance involving rain, lightning, and battle. But the column doesn't settle the theological question. It tells us that Rome remembered. It doesn't tell us that Christian prayer caused the storm. It doesn't prove the Hanufis explanation either. It stands as imperial memory, not as a courtroom verdict. That distinction matters because ancient images, like ancient texts, can be pulled into later arguments. A carved storm can become evidence in more than one story. Rome could point to divine favor over the emperor's army. Christians could point to the prayers of believers in the ranks. Later legend could point to an emperor supposedly forced to honor the church. One event, several claims. And beneath all of them, a real human pressure stays in place. Men in a war zone, desperate for water, watching the sky. So why did Christians care so much about this storm? Not because it gave them an easy proof text. The evidence is too complicated for that. They cared because the story answered one of the hardest questions facing believers in the Roman world. What if the empire sees your faith as dangerous? What if refusing the public gods makes you look like an enemy of the public good? What if your prayers, your worship, your allegiance to Christ are misread as disloyalty? Tertullian's use of the rain miracle presses right into that pressure. He isn't only saying a miracle happened. He's saying, you think Christians weaken Rome, but in this story, Christians prayed when Rome was helpless. That's why the story carried apologetic force. It let Christians say that faithfulness to God didn't make them useless to their neighbors. Their loyalty wasn't identical with sacrifice to Roman gods. Their service could be hidden, prayerful, and still real. But even here, the script has to stay honest. The point isn't that Christians controlled the weather. The point is that Christians interpreted crisis through prayer, and then used that memory to defend their place in a world that often mistrusted them. That's a different kind of strength. It's less tidy than the legend. It's also more faithful to the sources. By the time the story reaches later Christian memory, it has become more than a storm. It's a miracle story. It's an apologetic argument. It's a claim about prayer. It's a warning about how quickly useful stories can grow beyond the evidence. And it's a reminder that Christians in the Roman world weren't only dying in arenas or standing before governors. Some were soldiers. Some were citizens. Some were trying to explain why allegiance to Christ didn't make them enemies of everyone around them. The miracle of the rain sits in that tension. Something dramatic seems to have happened during Marcus Aurelius's Danubian campaigns, usually dated to 172 or 174. A Roman army in danger was relieved by a sudden storm. Ancient sources remembered the crisis. They disagreed over why the relief came. Our earliest substantial non-Christian witness says the army was near collapse and then saved by storm, and preserves a Roman explanation that credited Egyptian ritual mediation. Christian writers claim believers in the army prayed and that God answered with rain. Later tradition added the thundering legion, imperial approval, and a pro-Christian letter that can't bear the weight placed on it. So the humble ending isn't weaker, it's stronger. The Church doesn't need forged certainty to receive this story with wonder. It can say that Christians remembered the storm as answered prayer. It can also admit that Roman memory told the story differently. Faithfulness doesn't require pretending the sources say more than they say. And maybe that's why this old storm still matters. Not because every question has been settled, but because the Church has always had to learn how to witness truthfully. When the world is watching, when the evidence is contested, and when the rain begins to fall on a battlefield no one can fully own.